Hello. You are listening to the news on Rainier Avenue Radio World. I'm Kendra. Today is Monday, January 18th. The news on Rainier Avenue Radio is live every Monday from 6 p.m. to 6:30 p.m., providing you with current, trustworthy, useful news content focused on super service to the local South Seattle audience. We will not tell you what to think, but instead provide the basis for you to discern and decide for yourself. Tonight, we'll talk about Washington's Face Finder tool, federal prisons on lockdown, Uganda's election, and Chris Henderson leaving Sounders. Now, on to the local news. Seattle's police watchdog office will investigate allegations that a police officer refused to wear a mask inside a hospital's emergency department, despite repeated requests from nearby staffers. Per Patch.com, a Seattle ER nurse alleged that an officer visited the hospital to get a statement from a patient, but refused to put on a mask while standing in a busy hallway. According to the account, multiple nurses handed the officer masks, which were thrown away, and he only relented temporarily after the issue was brought to hospital supervisors. The Seattle Police Department released a brief statement saying that the behavior described in the post would be quote-unquote unacceptable for one of its officers. The police department did not say whether the officer would be placed on leave pending the outcome of the investigation. The OPA has up to 180 days to clear most cases, at which point the watchdog's director issues a ruling on whether misconduct took place. One man has been arrested after a bomb scare outside the FBI Seattle headquarters Saturday. Per Patch.com, despite the threat, officers say there was no bomb and that the public was never in danger. They also say that it appears the bomb threat was the act of a lone individual and likely unrelated to current political tensions. According to police, the incident started as a vehicle fire. Around 1:14 p.m., SPD says they got a call of a car with a tire on fire just outside the FBI Seattle division. However, when officers contacted the driver of the car, he told them he had intentionally set his car on fire to get their attention and that there was a live bomb inside the vehicle. The man was then taken into custody, and SPD's arson and bomb squad was called in to investigate the car. During police response, nearby stretches of 3rd and 4th Avenues were closed for several hours. A cold front expected to move into the Puget Sound region on Sunday brings the potential for lowland snow early next week. The cold air will drop snow levels to near sea level on Monday, bringing with it a chance for a mix of rain and snow showers, especially in areas north of Seattle. While there is a chance of lowland snow, the forecast shows a low chance for any major snow event. The current lowland snow accumulations would only be between a trace to 2 inches. Temperatures are expected to warm a little and dry out by the middle of next week, King 5 reports. For this week, expect partly cloudy conditions with a little rain on Tuesday and Saturday. A community center in northeast Tacoma will become a temporary homeless shelter by the end of January, despite pushback from people who live nearby. King 5 reports the center at Nordpoint, which operated by Metro Parks Tacoma, will become a 24-hour temporary warming center for adult women and couples to get out of the cold. The center at Nordpoint is in the heart of a residential neighborhood, and some neighbors who contacted King 5 expressed concerns about security and resources for this shelter. The city of Tacoma held a listening session last week to hear neighbors' concerns, and they've been answering people's questions online. One of the main questions was why the city needs to transform a community center into a warming center for the homeless in the first place, even if it's just for a short period of time. The city of Tacoma said, due to COVID-19 shelter operators needing space to abide by social distancing requirements, it was necessary. Tacoma has made changes from its original plan after hearing from neighbors, including dropping the number of people allowed at the warming center from 55 to 25. They will also require people to make reservations before walking in, so there are no walk-in options allowed. Tacoma said the warming center at Nordpoint will close by the end of February, in time for Metro Parks officials to clean the building ahead of a planned reopening in April. Tacoma police said they will make it a priority patrol area to address some of the concerns about security by neighbors. Washington has now entered Phase 1B of vaccine distribution, meaning the COVID-19 vaccine will be more broadly available for the state's higher priority residents. Per Patch.com, effective Monday afternoon, the state has entered first tier of Phase 1B, aka Phase 1B1. That tier has also been modified slightly to allow anyone 65 years or older to receive the vaccine. Previously, 1B1 only allowed patients over the age of 70. Phase 1B1 also allows for vaccinations for residents who are 50 years old or older or live in multi-generational households. In the earlier Phase 1A, the vaccine was limited solely to healthcare providers and residents of long-term assisted facilities. Lastly, in local news, Washington State has rolled out a more robust version of an online tool that determines eligibility for COVID-19 vaccine, King 5 reports. As of Monday, the Face Finder tool asks additional questions about underlying health conditions, your living situation, and whether or not you are an essential worker. The Washington State Department of Health initially rolled out the Face Finder pilot in early January, but at the time, it only determined eligibility for Phase 1A, which includes high-risk healthcare workers and long-term care residents. The survey now asks questions related to Phase 1B, which has 4 tiers that include people over 70, people over 50 living in multi-generational households, high-risk critical workers, and people with underlying health conditions. This is the news on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. When we come back with national news, you'll hear about the federal prisons on lockdown and more. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Rainier Avenue Radio.world. This is the national news. President-elect Joe Biden is expected to cancel the Keystone XL pipeline permit on his first day in office, quickly reversing his predecessor's approval of a project to move oil from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico. Per the New York Times, environmentalists have long targeted the nearly 1,200-mile pipeline as both a contributor to climate change and a physical symbol of the country's unwillingness to move away from an oil-based economy. Many Republicans, including President Trump, argue that the pipeline would create jobs and help local economies. Biden said that during the presidential campaign, he intended to once again cancel the permit. A California man who told police that the coronavirus pandemic made him afraid to fly has been arrested on charges that he hid in a secure area of the Chicago O'Hare International Airport for 3 months. 36-year-old Aditya Singh is charged with a felony criminal trespass to a restricted area of an airport and misdemeanor theft after he was arrested on Saturday. Chicago AP reports at a hearing on Sunday, a judge ruled that the Orange County man could be released if he paid $1,000, but added Singh was prohibited from setting foot in the O'Hare Airport. Assisted public defender Courtney Smallwood said Singh does not have a criminal record. Smallwood also said it's unclear why Singh, who is unemployed, came to Chicago or if he has ties to the area. The Chicago Tribune reported, Assistant State's Attorney Kathleen Haggerty said that Singh was spotted by 2 United Airlines employees who asked him for identification. Singh showed a badge that actually belonged to an operations manager who had reported his badge missing back in October. Before Cook County Judge Susanna Ortiz granted bail for Mr. Singh, she was clearly troubled by someone who could remain in a secure area for so long at an airport without anyone noticing. Authorities are locking down all federal prisons as the country braces for potential violence leading into the swearing in of President-elect Joe Biden. Per NPR, the Bureau of Prisons did not specify the length of the lockdown, but says the agency was securing all of its facilities as a precautionary measure brought on by, quote, current events occurring around the country, unquote. The lockdown went into effect at midnight Saturday after inmates had been secured in their cells for the night. The Bureau of Prisons statement said that the inmates would still be provided with access to email and telephones, but that communications with families would be limited. The agency also said that no specific information led to the lockdown, nor was it in response to any quote-unquote significant event occurring within a federal prison. The U.S. Capitol complex temporarily locked down during a rehearsal for President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration after a fire in a homeless encampment roughly a mile away sent a plume of smoke into the air and caused security concerns in the already jittery city. According to Como News, law enforcement officials said there was no threat to the public and that the fire was not believed to be a threat to the inauguration. Local firefighters put out the blaze rather quickly. The evacuation of some participants and a lockdown were ordered by the acting chief of Capitol Police in an abundance of caution. Biden was not participating in the rehearsal, nor were other VIPs who will attend Wednesday's ceremony. Gun rights activists will converge on the Virginia State Capitol on Monday for an annual demonstration that falls at an especially tense time this year, after the January 6th siege of the U.S. Capitol and 2 days before the presidential inauguration. Lobby Day has authorities on alert in Richmond, about 110 miles south of Washington, D.C., where President-elect Joe Biden will be sworn in on Wednesday, replacing Republican President Donald Trump. Lobby Day takes place in the highly polarized climate, following a year in which anti-racist and white nationalist demonstrators clashed across the United States, and as strident Trump supporters cling to the hope he could remain in power. Nationwide, pro-Trump demonstrations scheduled for Sunday largely fizzled after the FBI issued warnings and several states deployed the National Guard, Reuters reports. Parler, a social media website and app popular with the American far right, has partially returned online with the help of a Russian-owned technology company. Per Reuters, Parler vanished from the internet when dropped by Amazon Inc.'s hosting arm and other partners for poor moderation after its users called for violence and posted videos glorifying the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. On Monday, Parler's website was reachable again, though only with a message from its chief executive saying he was working to restore functionality. The internet protocol address it used is owned by DDoS Guard, which is controlled by two Russian men and provides services including protection from distributed denial of service attacks, infrastructure expert Ronald Gulmete told Reuters. If the website is fully restored, Parler users would be able to see and post comments. Most users prefer the app, however, which remains banned from the official Apple Inc. and Google stores. Coronavirus deaths are still rising in nearly 2/3 of American states as a winter surge pushes the overall toll towards 400,000 amid warnings that a new, highly contagious variant will take hold. The U.S. government has already curbed travel from some of the places where the new variants are spreading, such as Britain and Brazil, and recently it announced that it would require proof of a negative COVID-19 test for anyone flying into the country. But the new variant seen in Britain is already spreading in the US, and the CDC has warned that it will probably become the dominant version in the country by March. They said the variant is about 50% more contagious than the virus, which has caused the bulk of cases in the US, though it is no more deadly, AP reports. This is the news on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. When we come back with global news, you'll hear about Uganda's election and more. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Rainier Avenue Radio.world. This is the global news. Guatemalan security forces cleared a road of hundreds of people in the mostly Honduran migrant caravan that had camped out overnight when authorities barred it from advancing towards the United States. Per Reuters, the Guatemalan government said the road in the eastern part of the country reopened to traffic after troops with batons and plastic shields closed in on the migrants just beyond the village of Vadohondo, about 35 miles from the border crossings into Honduras and El Salvador. With soldiers looking on, groups of migrants, many with young children and carrying bags and luggage, then waited in lines to board buses, returning them to the El Florido border crossing with Honduras. The removal of the large group was the latest effort by Guatemalan authorities to break up the caravan, which authorities said numbered close to 8,000 people, within hours of its departure for the United States from Honduras last week. About 2,000 of the migrants installed themselves on the road after they clashed with Guatemalan security forces on Sunday during a failed effort to make their way past them. Some people were injured as troops forced the crowd from the road. Brazil kicked off a nationwide COVID-19 immunization program by distributing doses of a vaccine from China's Sinovac Biotech following an emergency use authorization, although the pace of vaccination will depend on delayed imports. Per Reuters, many Brazilians cheered the first wave of inoculations, from bustling clinics in Sao Paulo to a spectacular shot planned at the foot of the Christ Redeemer statue overlooking Rio de Janeiro. The health ministry gave the state's green lights to start immunizing at 5 p.m. Although some began administering shots before that, the majority of Brazil's 26 states had yet to receive vaccine shipments as of Monday evening, delaying the start of vaccinations for the elderly and frontline health workers. President Jair Bolsonaro, a COVID-19 skeptic who has refused to take the vaccine himself, has faced severe criticism for the lack of immunization in Brazil, which has lost more than 200,000 lives to COVID-19, the pandemic's worst toll outside of the United States. Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni has won a sixth term in office, fighting off a challenge by former singer Bobi Wine. Per NPR, the nation's electoral commission announced on Saturday that Museveni received 58% of the vote to 34% for Wine. Wine is alleging that the vote was rigged, as election officials faced questions over how results were tallied amid an internet blackout. Ahead of Thursday's election, Museveni's government shut down social media outlets, including Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter in Uganda. It also sent military vehicles into the streets. Wine said security forces were not allowing anyone in or out of his home, and he urged Ugandans to reject the results. A Russian judge on Monday ordered opposition leader Alexei Navalny jailed for 30 days, a ruling that comes after the leading Kremlin critic returned to Russia from Germany, where he was recovering from a nerve agent poisoning that he blames on President Vladimir Putin's government. The ruling concluded an hours-long court hearing at a police precinct where Navalny was being held since his arrest at a Moscow airport on Sunday evening, sparked sharp reactions both at home and around the world. The crowd of Navalny supporters outside the precinct immediately called for protests as the judge announced the ruling, Daria Litvinova, so the AP reported. His arrest had already prompted a wave of criticism from the U.S. and European officials, adding to existing tensions between Russia and the West. The death toll from tribal violence between Arabs and non-Arabs in Sudan's West Darfur province climbed to at least 83, including women and children, a doctors' union and aid workers said, as sporadic violence continued on Sunday. The deadly clashes grew out of a fistfight Friday between two people in a camp for displaced people in Jenina, the provincial capital. An Arab man was stabbed to death, and his family attacked the people in the Kringding camp and other areas Saturday, AP's Sami Magdi reported. The clashes pose a challenge to efforts by Sudan's transitional government to end decades-long rebellions in areas like Darfur, where most people live in camps for the displaced and refugees. Sudan is on a fragile path to democracy and is being ruled by a joint military-civilian government. India aims to vaccinate 300 million people by July, though it could take an additional 2 more years or more to inoculate nearly all 1.4 billion Indians. Per NPR, the shots are voluntary. Hospitals and clinics have been setting up and rehearsing for weeks. Earlier this month, the Indian government granted emergency authorization to 2 vaccines, one developed by Oxford University and the pharmaceutical giant AstraZeneca, and a homegrown formula developed by an Indian company, Bharat Biotech. Both are administered in about 2 doses about a month apart. The latter is still in phase 3 clinical trials, and a full efficacy data is not out yet. Some scientists, public health experts, and opposition politicians accuse the government of risking public safety to rush out an indigenously made formula out of national pride. Bharat Biotech and Indian officials insist the formulas are safe. Lastly, in global news, Australia is unlikely to fully open its borders in 2021, even if most of its population gets vaccinated this year as planned. Per BBC News, the comments dampen hopes raised by airlines that travel to and from the country that could resume as early as July. Citizens, permanent residents, and those with exemptions are allowed to enter Australia if they have a complete 14-day hotel quarantine at their own expense. Qantas, Australia's national carrier, reopened bookings earlier this month after saying it expected international travel to, quote, begin to restart from July 2021, unquote. However, it added this dependent on Australia's government decision to reopen the borders. This is the news on Rainier Avenue Radio.world. When we come back with sports news, we'll talk about Chris Henderson having to leaving the Sounders and more. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Rainier Avenue Radio.world. This is the sports news. Chris Henderson is officially leaving the Sounders to become Inter Miami CF's new chief soccer officer and sporting director. Per the Seattle Times, the Cascade High alum has worked a similar position for the Sounders FC since 2008. Henderson put Seattle on the map as a top-tier soccer club in his position as Sounders vice president of soccer and sporting director. One of the franchise's first hires, Henderson helped acquire talent like Nico Lodiero, Raul Ruidiaz, and Clint Dempsey. The The Sounders won 2 MLS Cups, 4 U.S. Open Cups, MLS Supporters Shield in 2014, 4 Western Conference Championships, and advanced to the league playoffs an MLS record 12 consecutive seasons. The Sounders advanced to the MLS Cup final in December, losing to the Columbus Crew SC. Henderson said in a news release, quote, "This is an incredible opportunity for me to take the next step in my career, return to South Florida, and solidify my mark on this league," unquote. The San Francisco 49ers said goodbye to 2 of their top assistants last week, but are keeping 2 more with a couple of in-house promotions that had been in the works for a while. Per ESPN, with 4 defensive coordinator Robert Saleh and passing game coordinator Mike LaFleur headed to New York Jets as head coach and offensive coordinator, respectively, the Niners elevated inside linebackers coach DeMeco Ryans and to replace Saleh as defensive coordinator, with run game coordinator Mike McDaniel taking over LaFleur's duties in a consolidated position as offensive coordinator. Both moves have been exposed since Saleh was announced as Jets head coach last week. In fact, 49ers coach Kyle Shanahan hinted strongly that Ryans was his first choice for the job at his season wrap-up news conference on January 4th. For now, Ryans is a defensive coordinator, representing a quick rise through the ranks after a successful 10-year NFL career as a linebacker for the Houston Texans and Philadelphia Eagles. Liam Hendriks has a full no-trade provision through October in his $54 million 3-year contract with the Chicago White Sox. Per ESPN, for the year after that, through October 2022, the closer can submit a list of 10 teams he can't be traded to without his consent. From November 2022 through the end of the contract, he can submit a list of 5 teams he can't be traded to without his consent. Hendriks gets a $1 million signing bonus payable this July 1st, and salaries of $11 million this year, $13 million in 2022, and $14 million in 2023. The White Sox have an unusual $15 million option for 2024 with a $15 million buyout, and if the option is not exercised, the buyout would be due in 10 payments of $1.5 million each July 1st from 2024 to 2033. To 2033. If Hendriks is traded, the option would become guaranteed. Chicago announced his agreement on Friday. Monday's game in Miami between the Heat and Detroit Pistons was pushed back 5 hours, with the league and teams making the decision so additional COVID-19 testing could be processed. The game was scheduled to begin at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and was pushed back to 8 p.m., Tim Reynolds of the Associated Press reports. It's the latest development, albeit a relatively minor one, as a wave of schedule changes in the NBA has now stretched into the second week. The league has postponed 13 games involving 18 teams since January 10th, including one matchup that was had to have taken place on today's Martin Luther King Jr. Day game schedule, Cleveland at Washington. The NFL's coaches, scouts, and personnel executives will not descend on Indianapolis in February for the annual scouting combine, as the league has altered the event to deal with the coronavirus pandemic. Per ESPN, the combine, which has been held in Indianapolis since 1987, will be modified due to COVID-19 precautions. In a memo obtained by ESPN that was sent Monday to team executives, athletic trainers, team physicians, and head coaches, the NFL outlined the format for this year's run-up to the draft. Routinely, around 330 of the draft's top prospects are invited to the combine each year, an event whose official name in the National Invitational Camp. The prospects are put through an on-field workout, a battery of psychological testing, in-person interviews with individual teams, and an extensive medical exam. This year, all on-field workouts will be conducted on on-campus pro days, and Monday's memo outlines that the league will try to have as much uniformity in the on-field drills as possible to give teams the ability to compare the workouts from one site to another. The memo does not specifically outline what COVID-19 precautions will be in place on the on-campus pro days, but indicates that more details about how team personnel are to attend the pro days will come at a later date. Lastly, in sports news, the number of players in hard quarantine swelled to 72 ahead of the Australian Open after a 5th positive coronavirus test was returned from the charter flights bringing players, coaches, officials, and media to Melbourne for the season opening tennis major. That means they won't be allowed to leave their hotel rooms or practice for 14 days, creating a 2-speed preparation period for the tournament. Other players in less rigorous quarantine will be allowed to practice for 5 hours daily, AP's John Pye reports. There were already 47 players, including Grand Slam winners, in hard quarantine after 3 positive tests were returned from a charter flight that arrived from Los Angeles and 1 from a flight that departed Abu Dhabi. Now it's time to go over tonight's show plugs. This week, Rainier Avenue Radio's Tony B is in Washington, D.C. This week covering the presidential inauguration that will check in live periodically with updates, so keep an eye out for that. Also, we welcome Black Evolutionary Movement to the station, so also stay tuned for more details, and after this, it's going to be Monday Night Sports. This is the news on RainierAvenueRadio.world. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you Wednesday.